This is the AceMagic X1. This is a dual screen laptop that AceMagic is selling now. They've been around for a bit selling mini PCs, and they're starting to branch out into laptops and stuff. You can see that this is just a YouTube video that's playing here. So if you wanted to, you could actually just use this if you wanted for whatever reason to have a display on your lid so that you can kind of show off whatever's going on while you're working on it. The only thing is they kind of show off promotional material where someone is kind of replicating the screen, they're mirroring the screen so that they could sit across from someone and they could show it off. But that's not really how it would ever work, because if you just take a look at their eyesight, they would have to look down, and because of how it would be on the panel, no one would ever do that. You would need to tilt this up on your desk so that it's comfortable for you to look at. You're not going to be sitting at a table with it at 90 degrees, which is kind of ludicrous that they would actually try to sell it like that. They do offer the function so that you could mirror the screen so that this would just show up. You can just press this button right there, and then it just mirrors it. So now when I do this, you can see that that's just mirrored. So there are some neat functions and functionality. You could also just do one display if you wanted to. So you press that button and then this turns off. I'll show you some battery life tests as well when we take a look at what it's like to have one screen on versus both screens on and seeing what type of battery life is, because you may think that battery life would suffer with both of them on. And it's really not that bad. Typically, a lot of mobile displays, they don't really take all that much juice. They do take juice, but not a bunch. It's really only when you crank up brightness or very bright panels where you're going to notice that particular power drain. And these aren't very bright panels. Very quickly, let's start talking about specs and what you get on this device. Now, the Intel i7 1255U that is on here is almost 3 years old at this point. I don't particularly mind how old that chip is. This is one area where if AceMagic needed to kind of finesse price to make sure they can get the price lower on this particular laptop, that's one area where I find it to be okay, especially on Intel side, because truthfully, Alder Lake, Rocket Lake, Meteor Lake, they're all pretty bad. So even going back to Alder Lake, it's not like it's that much better going up to Meteor Lake, right? So if it was going to inflate the cost a bunch, I don't really care. Alder Lake, especially for productivity purposes where this laptop finds itself, that particular chip is fine. It does have 16 gigs of RAM. That 16 gigs of RAM is soldered on board, so it's not upgradable. When you take a look on the inside, you can see it's clearly soldered. There are two M2 2280 slots. Obviously, one of them is already populated with the 1 terabyte NVMe that is included. That 1 terabyte NVMe is actually very, very fast. So it's a nice NVMe that included in there. I kind of wish that they went for 256 gigabytes just to get that cost a little bit lower on the initial price. It also has a really nice 60 watt hour battery. This is going to give it pretty good battery life, and we're going to show you battery life in just a moment later on in this video, and we're going to show you a nice graph showing you what that looks like in real time. I think one of the things that's pretty interesting to me, that the choice that AceMagic has made, it's a little bit difficult to actually open this up, is that they chose not great displays. They are IPS displays, so when you take a look at these, there's also a fingerprint sensor right here, so you can just put your fingerprint down and that'll log you in. I'm going to go ahead and put on both screens just so you can see that running, and then you can see it just automatically went back to that YouTube video where it was before. So functionality-wise, it's pretty cool, but the displays, obviously, this is going to be the part that should sell the laptop, right? The specs of it are fine enough for productivity purposes. The Alder Lake chip is going to be fast enough for what you need to do, especially it being capped at around 22 watt. 16 gigs of RAM, sufficient for most productivity use cases. 1 terabyte of storage is more than enough. So that's got it all handled. But when you're trying to sell off two displays, why would you choose kind of lackluster 14-inch 1920 by 1080 IPS displays? They are IPS. They are not just a pneumatic, but they have not the best viewing angles. They are indeed IPS. The model of the displays on both of them, they're identical, is the NV140 FHM-N48. And that's the version that they came with here. They are the matte versions. They do have a glossy version that they sell as well of this particular panel, but they went with the matte versions. And unfortunately, it's also plastic as well. So it's not even glass on here, which honestly, glass makes LCDs just look nicer and they're easier to clean, but they have these giganto borders on here. When you're trying to sell two displays, I think they could have done a much better job with what they were doing here. If you're going to be selling a productivity laptop that its whole purpose is having two displays, I really think that they should have put the money here instead of that NVMe or anywhere else. So I don't know, this is probably the weakest part of them, even though it does function very well with what you need to do. There are some other caveats that we need to talk about when we talk about in this video, but like one of the other things that should be noticeable, even on this display, it'll become more apparent, is the pulse width modulation on the backlight display itself. So if we go ahead and kind of lower the brightness here, you can see that it lowers the brightness in tandem. So that's a nice functionality software-wise, that the brightness is mirrored amongst both of them. And you wouldn't see this with your eyes. This flickering is not present with your eyes. But what's happening here is this is a PWM backlight. So it's called pulse width modulation. And what that means is that to adjust the brightness of the display itself, what it's doing is it's actually oscillating the backlight on and off to have less brightness. So that's the flickering that you're seeing on the camera. When you're looking at it directly, you're not going to see it. However, some people do get affected by PWM displays. It can give them headaches. If you're the type of person that is affected by PWM displays, this is not going to be a laptop for you, because it's very apparent that that's what's happening here. Before we start going into the rest of this review, talking about the review for the battery life, or even just a typing experience, or even the weight, I want to quickly address the types of ports and expandability that you have. It's really not all that much, and it's kind of lackluster as well. On the right side of the laptop, we have a single USB 3.0 USB-A port, an HDMI 2.0 port, so not even HDMI 2.1. It's a little bit unfortunate to see the cost-cutting measures that they took on the USB-C ports, specifically with just the charging-only port. I don't think that there's a real good reason that it's charging only when it could also do data as well as DisplayPort out. As likewise for that other port that does data and DisplayPort out, that should be a charging port as well. So there are cost-cutting measures that are very apparent on this particular laptop. But anyway, I digress. Let's talk about some other things on here, like the typing experience on here. The typing experience is like what they would typically define as the Chocolate Island keyboard. And now, Chocolate Island keyboard is something that Apple MacBooks originally kind of came out with. However, the type of keys that are on this keyboard are chunky and fat, and they have a good bit of travel on them. If you take a look at it, I tried getting a good angle of it so you can see how much those keys protrude from the keyboard itself. They do protrude a bunch. That's not to say that it's terrible. It just is not the best feeling for a keyboard, but it's not that it's not usable. It's quite usable, in fact. It's just that the feeling of it is not great, and it almost kind of highlights that AceMagic still has a lot of work to do in improving the quality of the laptops, or how they're producing these laptops. This laptop keyboard experience, I'm not the fastest typer in the world, and in fact, I'm still getting 75 words per minute on here, so overall, that's still fine. There is very few keys that I would kind of move around. The only key that I would particularly move around is the right shift key, which is sharing space with the cursor keys, and that does get in the way of when I'm typing, because my pinky finger wants to kind of just press on a right shift key, and I'm often pressing on the up arrow. Now, because the Alder Lake chip on this is capped out at a pretty reasonable power level, it goes up to about 24 watts on average. Because it does that, and it has a fairly comprehensive heatsink solution, it doesn't get very loud. You can hear the fans, but they're not blaring away, and they're only going to be blaring away when it's used, a lot of stuff is going on. Often it is a low whisper hum, so sound-wise from what comes out of this is what you would anticipate for a typical productivity laptop. When we take a look at battery life is really interesting, and I was glad to be able to see what that looks like between these two. So up first, this red line indicates a single screen use case of battery life. And you can see that we're getting close to 7 hours of battery life. And the blue line represents with both screens on. And you can see that with both screens on, we're really not getting all that much less battery life. It's basically going to be close to 7 hours as well. So with both screens on at max brightness, there really isn't that much of a difference in battery life. Now, the displays themselves don't get all that bright for outdoor viewing. The flip side, the positive side of that, is that you almost guarantee that you're going to get very good battery life, even at max brightness for both of those displays. Now, you can only use this indoor, but even when you take a look at my battery life display, when we have periodic use coming up, and you can see those spikes coming up whenever it's cycling through the program that I have it running on, that it only briefly does that and then goes back to a regular amount of power use throughout. So we spike up a little bit every now and again, but not that much. So overall, really good results on battery life. The flip side of this, especially with the entire arrangement of how this thing is designed, is this sucker is heavy. This laptop clocks in at 4 pounds and 4 ounces. To put that in perspective, my work laptop that was given to me from my job is 3.5 pounds. So almost a pound less from a typical standard business laptop. And that kind of is immediately felt. Like when you pick it up, it's quite hefty. And potentially it's hefty. It has to be hefty because when you open up the screen sideways, it can be a little bit wobbly. So perhaps the weight is there just to kind of keep it stable. Potentially. The other thing is, like, even we take a look at like even modern gaming laptops. This is a laptop from Asus that has a 4060 in it. Even that laptop weighs less than the Dell business laptop at 3.3 ounces. So it kind of shows you the extreme of like when you have a company like Asus that can make really good laptops and make lightweight high-end gaming laptops that weigh 3.3 ounces. So it has a CPU and a GPU and a heatsink to cool both of those off. And it weighs less than, a device that has, 2 screens. So it's a bit odd to see. Now, that's not to say that there aren't laptops that are heavier than that. I do have a workstation laptop that I have as well, and this is a big chunker. And when I put it on the screen, when I put it on the scale, it actually errors out. So there are laptops that are heavier than this. If you've had a big chunker desktop replacement workstation type of laptop, obviously that's much heavier than what this is. But for a kind of like, traditional laptop, especially in 2024, this is on the heavier side. From a user experience side, how AceMagic is doing this, those buttons that are going to address how the displays are operating kind of takes away all of the guesswork that someone is doing, and pressing each one is understood and what it's going to do. And I had no problem instantiating either one of those. So pressing all those buttons is how you would go about moving the screens or however the screens want to be. And from a user experience side, AceMagic nailed that particular part. The other thing that is kind of interesting is that the machine will go on standby when you have a lid close event, and it will even go on the standby when you just close the lid. So that's another kind of neat point to talk about for this particular laptop, just so that you can be aware of what's going on. At this point, I want to jump into the parts that I don't like about this laptop. There are a number of things that I think AceMagic could improve upon, things that I've already talked about. Number one being just getting better displays. The displays that AceMagic have chose for this particular laptop, I don't feel are the best. Especially having a plastic mat that is over it, it feels very, very old, like something that you would get almost 12 years ago. I think a lot of companies have already adopted putting glass over IPS automatically. So having a glass would be easier to clean, it would look nicer, and just be more presentable overall. There are gigantic bezels on there, but that's one of the only things that I think I would address first off. But even just from a design point of view, when opening up the laptop into dual display, you kind of need to open it in specific ways, because if you don't have the laptop fully opened, it's impossible for you to open. You'll actually just like scrape it along the inside. So you have to prop it up open enough for it to kind of like accordion out before you can kind of position it. So it's a little bit cumbersome to use. Like if you're on a plane and needing to do this, you might not have a lot of space to do this, and you may have to kind of do a little bit of gymnastics to just open this up properly in a confined space. So that is probably number one that I would talk about in this type of thing, but to be expected, right? And one other thing that seems almost like a missed opportunity is that the second panel has no touchscreen functionality whatsoever. And it feels like that's a missed opportunity, especially if you were to like do a tent mode or something where you wanted to have it so that the display could be just facing you and the laptop can be away from you, where the only type of input you would have would be your finger. And not having a touchscreen on there seems like a big missed opportunity. Not that that's necessary, and I'm sure it is a cost-cutting measure by not having that, but not having it means that it's not great. But I guess if you wanted to have your display on the back of your lid, you don't want just someone touching the screen and affecting what's going on. So perhaps not having a touchscreen is also good as well. And the last thing that is just maybe not to my taste at all, and it kind of annoys me that it's there, is there's this little emblem that is like buried and permanently attached to the laptop, and it says, "Stay hungry, stay foolish" in gold, and it has this like plastic that's over it, so it's just weird looking. It sticks out like a sore thumb. I initially thought it was a sticker that I could take off, but no, it's there, and I can't take it off, or at least I don't think I can take it off. I tried prying it with my fingernail a couple of times, and that sucker wasn't coming off. So can I recommend the AceMagic X1? It's a bit hard for me to recommend it, honestly. Just everything that's on offer, the sum of everything altogether, even at $850 with the $50 discount that's in the description field below, it feels a little bit too high. I feel like you are going to have to be the person that absolutely wants to have this to bypass all the things that are not the best on here. They really should have went for better displays at the very least. That would have made it, easily recommendable. But with the displays that they have on here being the main focus of it, it's kind of a bit of a deal breaker, especially if you're going to be someone that's affected by PWM, pulse width modulation. That is already a deal breaker for you. But if you can find it, if this goes on sale, go on a deeper sale around like $700, that's going to be a little bit easier to recommend overall. But if you're someone that needs two displays, honestly, I can see the value in it, and it is worthwhile just having it on your lap and using it. How much weight is there? It didn't really get involved. There was nothing that felt unusual to use, and there was a benefit to having dual screens. Thank you very much to the YouTube channel members as well as my Patreon members. Your support really means the world to me, guys. I hope this video was informative. As always, guys, thank you for your time, and thanks for watching.